teach you Envira rules in 10 minutes. Goal of the game is to capture the tiles from the playing grid and to collect the points from the tiles or from the sets of different tiles of one theme. The game is played in a series of fast rounds. Each round has 2 phases. In the first phase, players simultaneously and secretly place 1 or 2 cubes from their reserve into their player boards. In second phase, they reveal their cube placement to each other by removing their player shields. And then, players move their cubes one by one from their player boards onto the corresponding tiles in the grid. They are proceeding in clockwise order from the player with starting figure to the last player and then back to the first player in the counterclockwise order. The tile is captured when a required number of cubes are placed on it. More players can place their cubes on the same tile. The game ends immediately after end tile is captured. First, we need to sort the tiles into 3 groups: starting tiles, marked with capital letter S, basic tiles, with no special marking, and one single end tile. Then, we randomly remove certain number of tiles from starting tiles group and basic tiles group. Number of removed tiles depends on the number of players. Please remember that in 2-player game, 3 tiles intended to use only in 3 or 4-player game must be included among removed tiles. These tiles are clearly marked. Starting tiles get arranged into a playing grid. Number of rows and columns depends on the number of players. One corner of playing grid is clearly marked with red corner card. Starting tiles not used during the setup, sorted group of basic tiles and end tile are put together into the drafting bag and shuffled. They create tile supply for the game. Each player takes 5 cubes of the same color, a player board and a player shield. Randomly choose starting player for the first round. Chosen player takes starting figure. It is very important that orientation of all player boards correspond to the playing grid. Red marked cutout on each player board and a red corner card make setting up orientation very easy. In 2 and 3 player games, only part of player boards are used. During first phase, all players simultaneously and secretly place 1 or 2 cubes from their reserve onto their player boards. They must place at least 1 cube, and if they place 2 cubes, they cannot place it on the same cutout. Since the cubes placed on player boards will be moved in the next phase on playing grid, players must think strategically and carefully pick their position in this phase. At the beginning of the second phase, all players remove their shields and reveal their cube placement to each other. Now it is very important to note how other players have placed their cubes in the first phase. Most of all, if there is any conflict between players by targeting the same tile on the playing grid. In case they have placed 2 cubes on their player boards in first phase, they can now choose which one to move first. In this situation, choosing the right order of cubes to be moved from the player board onto the corresponding tile in the playing area by a player in conflict become extremely important. Starting player moves 1 of their cubes from the player board onto the corresponding tile in the grid. After the first player, all other players in the clockwise order move their first cube from their board onto the corresponding tile in the playing area. Then the order reverses and the last player immediately moves their second cube. Gameplay continues counterclockwise. The starting player moves their second cube last. Now it is the time to explain capturing of tiles in more details. To win Envira game, players need to capture as many tiles as possible during the game. Anytime a player moves their cube onto a tile, and as a result the total number of cubes placed on this tile corresponds to the number of cube icons depicted on the left side of this tile, the tile is captured by the player who has the most cubes on it. In case of a tie, the tile goes to the player that placed their cube on this tile last. Cubes from the captured tile are immediately returned to the player's reserve. After the last player places their second cube on a tile, the round ends. At the end of the round, every tile that was captured during the round gets replaced with a randomly selected tile from the tile supply. If there are no more tiles in the tile supply, the game continues with fewer tiles in the playing area. Bear in mind that some tiles are not immediately available. These restricted tiles have colorful icons located on the right side. To capture a restricted tile, a player must first possess tiles of required colors. It is important to know that the restriction only applies in second phase. So in the first phase, player can place their cube on a cutout corresponding to a restricted tile, hoping that by moving their other cube first in the second phase, they get the tile of required color and unlock restricted tile just before moving their second cube on it. Of course, this requires careful planning. Before the next round begins, every player must have at least one cube available in their reserve. Remember that cubes placed on tiles not captured during the round remains on those tiles for the next rounds, until the tiles are captured by any player. If the player has no cubes available at the end of the round, because all of their 5 cubes are placed onto tiles in the playing grid, these cubes are removed from the playing grid and returned to the player. All of them. The players must avoid this situation at all costs, because it hinders their effort from previous rounds. Last thing to do at the end of the round is to move starting figure clockwise to the next player. Next round can begin. One more important thing to remember. If a player placed only one cube on their board in the first phase, they must move this only cube when the turn comes to them in the second phase. They cannot wait until the order reverses. Similarly, if a player cannot move one of their cubes because the corresponding tile has been just captured by another player, the cube immediately returns to player's reserve. The player must play their other available cube, even if this hinders their former placement strategy and helps their opponent to gain the tile. In our example though, Grey player just lost their chance to play any of their cubes, because of failed so-called combo planning. Now that we know most of the Envira rules, we can follow the rest of the second round. The game continues with consecutive rounds until the end tile is captured. If the end tile is drawn out while replacing captured tiles, first thing to do is to check if any player meets the conditions to capture this restricted tile. That means if any player already has the tiles of all 3 colors. If no player meets this criteria, the end tile cannot be used as a replacement and another tile must be drawn from the supply. The end tile is then returned back to the supply. If the end tile is last remaining tile in the supply and no player meets the criteria to capture it, the game immediately ends. Now we fast forward right to the end of the game. The game ends immediately when the end tile is captured by any player. After that, players cannot move any of their cubes left on their player boards, nor can they capture more tiles. Now it is time for scoring. First, players need to sort their captured tiles into sets of one theme or color, but different symbols. It is possible to make multiple sets from one theme, but each tile can belong to just one set. Now players count their victory points depicted in little yellow stars on top of captured tiles. Note that not all tiles reward players with straight victory points. Finally, Players add victory points awarded for sets of tiles of one theme, but with different symbols on each tile forming the set. The player with the most victory points is the winner. If there is a tie, the player who gained more set points wins. If the tie is not broken, player who captured the end tile wins. Otherwise, tied players share their rank. Included with the base game is Equilibrium Expansion. This optional expansion can be used in 3 ways. Firstly, 2 Equilibrium cards are selected at random and placed visibly next to the playing grid. First player to capture all tiles with the depicted symbols immediately gains the corresponding Equilibrium card. At the end of the game, this player adds victory points from the card to its point total. Secondly, each player picks one Equilibrium card in random. This card remains hidden from the other players until the end of the game. If during the game player collects the tiles with symbols depicted on this card, they can add Equilibrium points to their victory point total. Lastly, players can agree to combine both previous variants. Now that's all you need to know to play Envira game. Enjoy the game.